Major developments are coming in tonight on the Iran negotiations, and the situation is moving faster than many expected. The president has canceled a planned cabinet meeting at Camp David and directed his senior officials to convene at the White House instead. The reason is straightforward. The Iran situation has reached a stage where decisions need to be made, and the president wants his team in the room. Secretary of State Marco Rubio described the state of talks in unusually direct terms, saying that a deal could happen at essentially any moment. His assessment is that there is strong alignment between the two sides on what a preliminary agreement should look like. The remaining gaps are real, but not necessarily insurmountable. As he put it, the final stage of any negotiation like this involves working through the remaining disagreements, and that process takes time. But the direction is clear. It is either going to be a good deal, or there is not going to be one at all. Now let us talk about what is actually on the table, because the details here matter considerably. The framework being discussed has a specific sequence built into it. Iran must first open the Strait of Hormuz. Full stop. No terrorism, no tolls, no conditions. Until that happens, nothing else moves. Once Iran demonstrates that the strait is genuinely open and unimpeded, the United States will begin a parallel process of loosening the economic blockade while simultaneously verifying that Iran is following through on its nuclear commitments. The nuclear side of this is where things get particularly significant. The American position has been described plainly: no dust, no deal. What that means in practice is that Iran must physically surrender or destroy its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. The president laid out the options directly. That uranium will either be transferred to the United States to be brought home and destroyed, or it will be destroyed in place inside Iran in a verified and coordinated process. Those are the options. There is no third path that involves Iran holding on to enriched material while receiving financial relief. Space Force and other surveillance assets are actively monitoring the known nuclear sites. The administration has made clear that the physical location of Iran's nuclear material is not unknown to American intelligence, and that verification of any agreement will involve real-time monitoring and inspection access underground. This is not a situation where Iran can claim compliance while quietly continuing enrichment in facilities that go unmonitored. The reason Iran finds itself at this negotiating table in a significantly weakened position comes down to a combination of military, economic, and diplomatic pressure that has been building for months. On the military side, Iran's naval capabilities have taken substantial damage. Operations against what has been described as Iran's Mosquito Fleet, the smaller fast attack vessels used to lay mines and harass shipping in and around the strait, have been carried out with significant effect. When Iran attempted to retaliate with missile strikes, those launchers were destroyed. The Pentagon has characterized these actions as defensive in nature, responding to direct Iranian provocations rather than initiating offensive operations. Israeli military operations have continued in parallel. More than 100 Hezbollah targets were struck in overnight operations in Lebanon, continuing a sustained campaign against the network of proxy forces that Iran has relied on to project power across the region. The economic picture is equally stark. The blockade of Iranian ports has already cost Iran an estimated $20 billion. When you add the accumulated weight of American sanctions going back years and the direct costs of the military conflict, Iran is estimated to be more than $100 billion in the red. Most of the senior leadership of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is either dead, incapacitated, or has gone into hiding. The ability to rebuild military capacity is severely constrained by both the physical destruction of industrial and manufacturing infrastructure and the continuing economic blockade that limits Iran's access to the materials and financing needed for reconstruction. The diplomatic dimension has added another layer of pressure that caught many observers by surprise. Over the weekend, the president reached out directly to leaders across the Arab world. The message he delivered was significant. The United States would only sign a deal and reopen the strait if the participating Arab nations agreed to join the Abraham Accords. That means normalization of relations with Israel. The list of countries involved includes Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey, among others. When that condition was laid out, the reaction in Arab capitals was described as stunned. This was not something that had been telegraphed in advance, but the response that came back, according to sources familiar with those conversations, was striking in its clarity. Arab leaders communicated that they were with the United States on the deal, and that if the deal did not work out, they would be with the United States on that outcome too. What the president has effectively done is transform the Abraham Accords from a bilateral diplomatic achievement into a regional security architecture. If Iran or any of its proxy forces moves against Israel, they are now, in effect, moving against the entire Arab coalition that has signed on to this framework. The strategic calculation for Iran becomes dramatically more complicated. Instead of facing Israel and the United States, the regime in Tehran would be facing a unified regional bloc that includes its Arab neighbors. The isolation that Iran has sought to avoid becomes the defining condition of any future confrontation it chooses to initiate. For the United States, this carries a significant practical benefit. If the regional powers have genuine skin in the game, if their own security interests are directly tied to whether this deal holds and whether Iran stays in compliance, then the burden of enforcing the agreement does not fall entirely on American shoulders. The era of the United States serving as the sole guarantor of Middle Eastern stability becomes less necessary when the regional powers themselves have committed to a framework that aligns their interests with stability. There is a genuine debate within the administration about whether this deal is the right outcome, and it is worth acknowledging that debate honestly. Some voices, including current and former military officials, argue that reaching a deal at this moment would actually strengthen Iran over the long term. The argument goes like this: Iran is weakened right now, but it is not destroyed. Any deal that Iran agrees to will necessarily include some form of sanctions relief and financial recovery. Billions of dollars flowing back into the Iranian economy will give the regime the resources to begin rebuilding. The prospect of eventual regime collapse, which some in the hawkish camp see as the most durable solution to the Iran problem, goes off the table the moment a deal is signed and the economic pressure is lifted. A senior administration official has acknowledged this tension directly, noting that the president's current view is that achieving more through continued military action is theoretically possible, but that the cost of doing so has to be weighed against what that additional pressure would actually produce. Iran's military-industrial complex has been significantly degraded. The regime's ability to rearm in the near term is limited, and American surveillance and inspection capabilities will remain in place after any agreement, meaning that the conditions that produce this negotiating leverage do not entirely disappear when a deal is reached. The markets appear to be reading this situation with a degree of confidence. The S&P 500 reached another all-time high, and oil prices closed below $100 per barrel. Those two data points together suggest that investors are not pricing in significant further escalation. Lower oil prices, if they are sustained, would eventually translate into relief at the pump for American consumers, which carries its own political significance. Administration sources are describing the deal as approximately 90% complete. The remaining work is largely about the specific language of the agreement
and being polite and orderly
substance.
caretaker.
Diplomatic negotiations at this stage often involve extended discussions over phrasing and framing, particularly when one side needs to be able to present the final text to its domestic audience in terms that allow them to claim they achieved something. That face-saving dimension is a real and normal part of how agreements like this get finalized. The cabinet has been summoned to the White House. The president has cleared his schedule. The Secretary of State is describing a deal that could be announced within days. What emerges from these final rounds of negotiation will shape the security landscape of the Middle East for years to come, and the world is watching closely. The verification architecture built into this deal reflects the lessons of past agreements. Enrichment capability is being physically dismantled, not merely paused. Uranium stockpiles are being removed or destroyed, not monitored in place. Inspection access is a precondition, not a future negotiating point. A carrier strike group positioned off the Iranian coast provides a visible and ongoing reminder that the consequences of non-compliance are real. The final shape of what gets agreed to in the coming days will determine whether this moment becomes a genuine turning point. All signs right now point toward a deal. But in diplomacy, nothing is final until it is signed. What the administration has built over these months is a multi-layered pressure campaign that combines military action, economic sanctions, diplomatic coalition building, and a clear public negotiating position. Each element reinforces the others. The military operations reduce Iran's capacity to resist. The economic blockade reduces its capacity to recover. The Abraham Accords expansion reduces its capacity to find regional allies. And the public clarity about what a deal requires reduces its ability to claim ambiguity about what is being asked of it. That combination of pressures, applied consistently and simultaneously, is what has brought negotiations to the point where a deal is being described as 90% complete and potentially finalizable within a week.